Okay, so we have the collar now. Again, I fused the top collar and not the bottom. I'm going to sew them together, paying particular attention to the collar. This is the collar. You're going to start here, 1/4 of an inch. Like I said, make sure that your notches, you don't snip your notches too deep, because you will wind up with some raw edge on your collar. Okay, 1/4 of an inch. Needle down, you're going to turn the collar around. Now, the reason why we have two, a top collar and an under collar, is for one, we do not need fusing on both. And two, the top collar is going to be a little bit bigger than the bottom collar, just because it will roll nicely on this edge here. This is the edge of the collar, and it will roll really nicely. Now, if you're more comfortable pinning this, then go right ahead. It's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. As you can see, my notches are meeting up, so I'm good. Can you see this? We need light. Let's get some light. That's better. It looks like I have a little extra on the collar. And that's always the case whenever you sew two pieces together. The top piece has a tendency to be longer just because the foot will drag that fabric. So mine is a little bit too long, but it will work in my benefit, because you want the under collar to be smaller. If you orchestrate it right, you could get it so that it's equal. I'm going to clip the corners. Clip these corners. Get this light so we can see it. And as usual, we're going to turn it right side out. Yes, and other than you guys that are only online, everyone else should be in class on Wednesday. It is the due date for your binder that you have reworked. So I do need you to be here. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to get up and press this. Okay, the iron was not hot, so I'm gonna have to do this without pressing.
The other iron.
No, that's all right. I can do this without pressing. The purposes of my shirt, my plan is to work. I'm working with white thread, and this is lilac linen, because I'm going to do the edge stitch for starters, but then I'm going to do an edge and a foot stitch, and that's going to be my decorative finish to this shirt. You only, right now, you really only need this edge stitch, because ultimately it's there. It's designed to help this collar stay flat. You could press it flat, but it will most definitely stay flatter when you stitch it. Hopefully I won't have any problems because it's not pressed. And the reason for the stay stitch is, for one, it's decorative, but for two, mainly, it is holding this under collar under the top collar. We don't want this to kind, like where I'm sewing here, it could come out like that, and you'll see the seam. I don't know if you could see that. I'm having some trouble with this camera too. I don't want to see my under collar poking out. That's the purpose of the stitch. Bear with me because I'm making a decorative second stitch, foot stitch, which means the edge and foot. That's a typical top stitching function. Follow the stitch with this side of the foot, and you'll have an accurate stitch. Perfect. So there's my collar. You have my have my 2 rows of stitching here. Now be discriminating because this is not a functional seam. So that's where I would make the decorative stitch. Now, the next step is to put the collar band on this. That is a functional seam. We don't need stitching with the 2 rows. We do need to edge stitch it. Make sure I have my notches. Yes, the notches are critical here. Like the collar and the collar band that we constructed. Oops. For the neckline sample. And this is fused on both sides. So let's get one of them. The curved edge here is where you're going to place the collar. And that's what the notches are about. We have one notch here. And the center back notch is the critical one. So let's line that up with the center back of the collar with the center back notch of the collar band on the curved side of the collar band. Now, when it's stretched naturally, it lines it. Wish this camera would move with me. It'd be so perfect. It ends right there at that notch. You see that notch? And that's where the collar ends. Pin that. And I'm going to pin it all along here too. See this side now. We're going to do the same thing to this side. And in fact, it meets right there at that notch. So now we have all of that in place. Again, like I said, pinning it is absolutely the way to go. I'm having some serious trouble with the camera today. It's got a mind of its own. Sorry. Now, for the other piece. Again, curved sides together. And then and matching up the notches. And let's put some pins on this side as well. It's such a small seam allowance. It's easy for the stitching to go off the seam, and then you'll have a gap in your collar band, which is not a good idea. Pin it. Making sure that your edges are lining up. Notches are matching, so we're in good shape. Everything is pinned. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, now that we have everything pinned, is this entire rounded edge of the collar stand with the collar inserted from here to here is now going to be sewn at 1/4 of an inch. Again, when you get up to this curved section, go slowly. it makes the curve so much more perfect. When you brush it, it has a tendency to get kind of square. Now I'm going to take my tint out of it again. Not a bad idea as you're sewing to make sure that you sewn past the notch. If in fact you may have cut it a little too deep, because take a little bit bigger of the seam allowance to offset the fact that you made the notches a little bit too deep. Getting a little drag here on my top collar stand because I'm pushing it with this foot. So I'm going to ease it in so I don't have any excess. Or I'm just going to pull them together. I'm at my notch, and I can see the notch, and I'm going to make sure that I sew on the other side of the notch so that we don't have any gap. I'm going to back tack it there. So the next thing we're going to do is this curve, which, like I said, go slowly because you'll make it more accurate when you do it that way. And my curve looks good. Now, it's not a bad idea at that the fattest side of the curve to make a couple of notches. I'm sorry?
Did you check with it? Because I'm confused how we're supposed to sew it, like all together.
That's what I just did.
Or
Yes.
okay. Okay, I was just confused because
This.
yeah. And then
This has to match. These two have to match.
those two don't, but the other two do. So I wasn't sure what to do.
No, you have to make them. Okay, work on that. Making the match. Okay, so now, again, like I said, I'm gonna make little notches in the curve so that it turns easily. Be careful, you don't want to cut too deep in that either. Now, we're going to do a stay stitch. This is my top collar. That is the side that I'm going to stay stitch on the collar stand. Starting at the collar, not the curved part at all. We're not going to go there at all. We're going to make an edge stitch that's going to have all of our seam allowance going toward the collar stand. As long as this is the top collar, right on the edge. The purpose of that serves to make sure I don't catch anything that I don't want. I'm always looking underneath to make sure. This is easy enough to do without pressing it first. Choose to, you can press it. once I do this, I will be pressing this entire collar just to make sure everything is flat and lined up properly. Again, like I said, I'm going to do that stitch only until this collar. Now turn this right side out. Pick up your threads first. And I have a nice curve here. And this is stay stitched. The under collar and the other side of the collar band is not stitched. So I'm going to press this. Now, in addition to pressing everything flat, what I decided to do for your benefit was to press the collar the way it is going to be applied on the shirt. That's ultimately what this is going to look like when it's finished and it's attached to the shirt. Thinking, let's see what the light. It looks kind of blurry, this video. Okay, let's see. So that's what the collar is going to look like. So I pressed this so that the collar was pressed down. You don't have to do that yet. But I wanted to show you, just to give you a visual, what it's going to look like when it's on the shirt. So that's the collars and the collar stand. Finished. That's the first preliminary operation, the collar and the stand. Now, we're going to make the placket. I'm going to stop the video. I need my shirt pattern and my placket patterns. So I'm going to take a break and get everything set up. And we'll do that next. Okay, what I decided to do for the sake of simplicity, I went and got my pocket flap. I'm going to make those first because they're a simple operation. The other two that we have to accomplish today are a little bit more tedious, so I'd rather start out with something simple. Okay, so we have notches here. What I've done is I've cut 4 of these, and I've cut one of them, one of the 2 with fusing.
I just have to
Okay,
add the stitching.
do the space stitch and you're good. Yes. Oh, wait.
And I need to cut the corner from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, well, you can press that out. That's not so good. Okay. Notice the notches. They're there for a reason. This smaller notch here is to provide the turnover that you need when you get it onto the garment. And these notches are just so that you can match up the 2 pieces. So let me make sure I'm starting on the right side. Okay, now it's this way. See what the versa. And again, 1/4 of an inch. This is not a functioning seam, so we're just going to do it 1/4 of an inch. I'll just do one. Now for this is going to be an easy turn. Again, you just fold those corners. You got a perfect corner for the flap. We're making these in advance, but we're going to have to set them when we're ready to set the pocket. The flap that goes on top. I'm going to press this. In my case, like I said, this is a decorative piece, so I'm going to do the edge and foot stitch on this flap. Now, as you can see, this is the top that's going to be applied to the shirt. This is the flap, so this flap will be loose like this. So this is the area that I'm going to do my top stitch. Edge and foot. Now, for you guys, if you have no intentions of doing any of these top stitches, just this edge stitch would be advisable, just because it will hold the flap, the edges of the flap down, so that we're not seeing the under flap. But I'm going 2 rows of stitching, which is more than is required. My flap is finished. Now, I'm going to leave it go because I made 1 flap. You have to do 2, making sure that it's a pair. Always make sure that everything is in the form of 2, so that they line up properly on the shirt. Do you have fusing on it?
Yeah.
Okay. Right sides together and then sew a quarter on the on one edge. Not the edge. See this pattern? See how it has two knots up there? Not this edge. This edge. Okay. After the sleeve. It's a little bit. Watch the sleeve. Now, in the order of operations, on the very last page, it gives you directions of how to do this placket. So it's a little bit tricky. So if you don't understand it, you can refer to your order of operations on the last page. Now, to start with, we're going to make sure we have a right and a left sleeve. Okay, so that would be indicated by the notches on this side. So I'm going to open it up. Actually, because it's in my way, I'm going to put a pin on the right side of these sleeves. So I can only have one on the machine at a time. Right, so to start with, here's our flat. The placket. There's notches on the bottom here that you need to pay attention to. They match to these last three notches on the sleeve. Now, first thing you want to do is you want to pin one of these with the longer edge of the flat towards these notches. Let's see, that's what they call it, the tower. Yes. I mean, it gives you a synopsis of exactly what you should do every step. But this will help aid you to give you a visual. Now, to do this properly, you're going to place. Now I have these two. You don't put it to the right side, you start it on the wrong side of the sleeve. And these three notches here are the notches that you want. As you can see, those are the notches that you've got. I mean, even if you don't pay attention to the details about this tower here, just matching up these notches is going to give you an indication as to where it should begin. Okay, so according to the directions, you need to stitch. It's a 3/8 inch seam. Yeah, going with the center notch here. If in fact you feel more comfortable, I would sketch a little line there just to give you accuracy. I'm going to do this by eye. So this notch here is where we're starting. You see this? This is the notch that we're using. So I'm going to have my foot a little bit more than the foot to start with, and that's 3/8 of an inch. Now we don't want it to come all the way to the edge. We want it to stop. says 1/4 of an inch. I would be a little generous. My fabrics praise a lot, so that's why I'm going to give it a little extra. Now, basically what we're doing is we're making a rectangle out of this stitch. See, in your case, it's probably not a bad idea to lightly with pencil to put the lines for where you're going to sew. But I'm just visualizing it. And if I do, and now I can keep my eye on this line and make sure this line is parallel. And here we are, right again, back finished notch, and I'm about a generous 3/8 of an inch away from that notch, which is what it calls for. Now, like most plackets, you must flip it. So we have that notch there. We're going to go right straight down the center so we get close to the top. And we're going to go into the corner, maybe a little more. I want to go as close to the stitching as I can without actually breaking the stitch. So now we need to turn this to the right side. But there's compressed. So we want to press this edge. We want to pull this onto the right side of the shirt. And I prefer to do this after I pressed it. So let me just give it a press and it'll show you what I'm talking about. To some degree, it's similar to the plackets that you've done on the toddler dress, but this is way more complicated because there's two parts of this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch not the tower side, the rectangle side, and I'm going to stitch. When I folded it, I pressed all of this going towards. Let me get in the camera for you. Pressed it all going towards the rectangle, and then I press the edge of the rectangle down. Now I'm going to cover it, cover the stitching, and I'm going to stitch this part of the placket down. On the edge. Oh, missed. Coming up against all of that raw edge is where we clipped it. Just go. We don't want to go past where we clipped it. And that, believe it or not, is the underside of this plaque. As you can see, hopefully, there's my where I clipped it to, and that's exactly where I stitched it to. Okay, now this other side. You need to fold it in half. I'm going to press this too. I'm going to fold all my seam allowance going towards the tower, and I'm going to press it. There's a notch here on the bottom of the tower. We're going to press it at that notch. Okay, now this is where it gets a little bit interesting. This is the top placket, and this is the bottom. Can you see the bottom? Oh. Okay. This tower is going to be stitched. We're going to encase all of this, all the raw edges there. And we're going to have it covered with the tower. Now, we're going to stitch the edge. Get this under the foot so I have something. Fold this. I'm going to fold the edge of the tower under and stitch it on the edge. Because we have this raw edge showing, we're going to turn it under, so we're going to cover that. Now we're getting right up into including all of that, all those clipped edges. Now, the way this is cut, it looks like it should just be a straight across placket, but we're going to do something a little different. Right there where my raw edge is, I'm going to put my needle down and I'm going to turn this around. I'm going to fold it so that it has a corner. Let's do it. It's a little difficult, so I'm going to do it straight across. Only on the edge. all of this raw edge, we're gonna have it underneath, and we're gonna stitch this down. Only to cover those raw edges. Now we can do several different things. Go straight across twice. Now, although this is a little long, I'm going to do that across. See if it had the point, what exists on the operation page, it would look better. But I'm going to do this. I'm going to start going from that corner to this corner, straight away. If you like I said, if you're not comfortable doing it freehand, then put in a nice little pencil line that you don't see. So we're going to go across. Being consistent, that you're always going to be in the same stitch pattern, so that we don't have lots of different stitches. That is your plaque. Now, you will do the same thing to the other side, but as you can see, I put a pin on the right side. I'm going to start on the wrong side of the other sleeve, and this is because now this is on the right side. That's your finished plaque. I'm going to press it. I do know that the first time that I ever did one of these plackets, it was a little overwhelming for me, but it just works all together so that you cover all of this. You can feel it. You cover all of the raw edges and the clipped part by putting this tower over it. And it looks really great. Okay, so that's the placket. Now, last but not least is to the left and the right front. Now, I took it upon myself to create a woman's shirt, so I flipped mine. Let me get my pattern pieces and I will be back. Let me put this on pause. Okay, I got my patterns. I'm sorry I got held up with class questions. What I did was you have the option. I sent you that sketch. It was a sketch of all the pieces. If you choose to make it a woman's garment, you have to flip a couple pieces, and that's what I've done. So now this is my right side. That's women's buttons right over left. So what I've done is I got the buttonhole panel that I've got all my fusing on it, and I put the right side of this buttonhole panel to the wrong side of the shirt. And there's a notch, so I'm going to sew it at that notch. It's a 1/2 inch.
I was so disappointed.
All the way down. Now, if you feel better pinning it, then do so.
Where?
It would be better to start with the fuse piece on the other knee. I'm dragging this top piece too much. Oh, I love that. You got a new dog and named it Lila. That's great. So now this is the buttonhole flag. I'm gonna press it so that the seam allowance goes away from the center. I'm dogging.
75%. 25%. I don't know, like.
Okay, so what I've done is I've pressed all of my seam flat, and this is the flat side. What basically what you need to do is turn it under. I should have done that with the iron, but I wanted you to see it first. Press it, there's a notch. Press the whole thing under that amount all the way down, and you're going to stitch it on the edge. I'm just going to do a small portion of it. The other side has another completely different operation. I'm going to face this. Okay, I'm just going to go a little of the way down. That's what it's going to look like. I'm going to do I'm going to finish it. I'm going to do all my top stitching. I'm going to get my other front. It looks like I paused this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the pocket over again. This is a finished pocket. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna try Canvas, but I'm having a hard time with this YouTube. They're not letting me post things. So Carly goes like she'll help me. Anyway, okay, so here's my other pocket. Starting with the notched edges, we have 1/2 inch at the top. You can press it or stitch it down. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to stitch mine. Just because it'll have consistency. Okay. Now there's another notch, about 3/4 of an inch down. We're going to turn it back both sides and stitch that 1/2 inch. One side. And the other. I'm going to turn the corners, my little corner trick. And I'm going to press the entire pocket. What I've done is I press my facing piece down flat, and I pressed all the other 3 sides of this pocket under 1/2 inch. Now the pocket is finished and ready to be applied on my shirt. And of course, just to give you a visual, now my pocket is going to have the edge and the foot stitch all the way around. Then my flap is going to be stitched position it to the camera so you can see what I'm doing. So make a seam here, turn it down, and in my case, I'm going to do 2 rows of top stitching, and that is what your pocket is going to look like finished on the shirt. So we'll save that for the next. I can get my other flap ready. I could put these on my shirt today if you like. I'm going to pause this, and if we have time, we'll come back. If not, I'd like you to field your questions to me if you have any information that you need. Okay, I'm going to pause. Okay. Back to the pocket. What I decided to do is I got one of my fronts finished. And the pocket can go on there. Now, I use this side because it's better for a visual. If I'm gonna put a pocket on here, I'm gonna look to see, you shouldn't have it too close to the, wait a minute.
Yeah, I
You shouldn't have it too close to the armhole.
No, I would never.
So I'm gonna visually give it a position. And then I'm gonna stitch, like I said, edge and foot. And then my flap is gonna go over top of it. I'm gonna stitch 3/8 of an inch, and then I'm gonna fold it down and top stitch this. And that's gonna be the looks of my pocket. Now, the reason I'm not sewing this is because what I'd like to discuss with you all is to let you make the decision as to whether or not your shirt should have this pocket, or in the case where one of my students here has a print, it kind of might not really look appropriate. So the only thing you're responsible to do is to make one of these and sew it on a piece of fabric and submit it with the shirt. And because if the shirt does not have a pocket on it, you will not have points taken off, but you need to submit one of the pockets on just a basic piece of fabric, like another sewing sample, but it's part of the shirt grade. So that's all I'm going to do today. I'm signing off. We were very busy today. We had a lot to do. We accomplished a lot. So stay focused and work on the shirt. Questions, let me know. Good luck.